and really my therapist helped me understand this. I always thought, okay, mental health equals depression.
So you've never had a job interview or anything?
I've always been an entrepreneur. I've actually never been anything else.
But whilst this could be a superpower, this is actually a learned behavior that we learn at such a really young age.
Anything like that, I didn't even go to college. And I think the other thing that's really important to notice is not everyone wants to be seen.
Welcome to the ADHDoers Story, where we speak with successful people who have ADHD about their stories, their struggles, and how they got to where they are today. We are speaking with Moj Mahdara today, and we go on to topics about mental health, gut health, how saunas can help, how therapy and inner child work can improve your ADHD. And she tells us about the new habits that have helped her with her ADHD. Hi Moj, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
How are you? Really good to see you.
Yeah,
How's it
good,
going?
thank you. Good my side. How's it going for you?
Can't complain. It's a holiday week. So yeah, all things considered, I think we're going to have a nice holiday.
Great. So I have been looking into your bio and you seem like a superpower to me. There's so many things that you do and I'd love to know a bit more about that. So for anyone who isn't already familiar with who you are, do you want to kind of just tell us a bit about how you are now and like where you are with your business and what you invest in and things like that?
Sure. I am a self-made, self-grown entrepreneur. I've started a few different businesses within the digital media commerce industries. I'm now a full-time investor. I invest in consumer-facing technology, brands, consumer goods, future of health, future of food. And yeah, I've been sort of a, I don't know, super creative person that just, I guess, is like left brain, right brain. So yeah, early internet person, early social media person, and early startup person. Yeah, those are kind of the things.
So when did you start?
When did I start being an entrepreneur? I've always been an entrepreneur. I've actually never been anything else. Mostly because to me, entrepreneurship is a super creative expression. It's somewhere that like all of my hunger for knowledge and hunger for doing and hunger for building kind of comes into focus. And so I've always been an entrepreneur. I've never had a corporate job or anything like that. I didn't even go to college. So I'm truly like true blue self-taught entrepreneur.
That's awesome. So I completely agree with you. Being an entrepreneur gives you that creative freedom to kind of do what interests you the most and to express yourself through your work as well. So is that just something that kind of came naturally to you? You didn't think, oh, I could work for someone else doing this thing that I love. It was always like, I just want to do this thing, and you just took full control of it.
I think I didn't know that people hired people like me. So I think I had an impression of like who was a hireable candidate, and being that I didn't go to college, being presented very queer, being that I occurred in a very different way, I just assumed that I was not hireable. So I just felt like, okay, how do I take control of my own future and my own destiny? And how do I have agency over myself? And how do I put my hands on the things I want to work on? And so I literally moved to Los Angeles in my early 20s. I bought a couple computers, started building websites, started sort of building out what creative consultancy could be, working in rich media. And it's kind of, that's all she wrote. Like, it's just, since then I've just been building companies.
So that kind of just made complete sense to you to go that route then. So you've never had a job interview or anything?
I had a job interview at Mrs. Fields Cookies. I had a job interview at Mailbox, etc., which was formative. I did work for my dad, and I think the only thing, no, I didn't have like a formal interview, but I've been on a million zillion pitches with investors, so I feel like that's
that is kind of the same, but even more high pressure if you think of it that way. Awesome. So obviously this is about ADHD and how that has affected you. So just to ask, like, have you been diagnosed with ADHD? Okay.
Yes,
how old were you when that happened?
Super recently, in the middle of the pandemic, when I just felt like nothing I did, like I just could not focus. And I think I was probably self-medicating on caffeine before that diagnosis. Yeah, I think I was self-diagnosing on caffeine before that. It was like somewhere in the middle of the pandemic, I was like, wow, I really could not focus. I'm having a hard time. And no amount of coffee was helping me, or green tea extract, or kind kind of any of those things. And so, yeah, my therapist suggested it. And as soon as I found sort of the time release capsules on a small enough dose, I'm lucky that I don't need a lot. I have like a super sensitive system when it comes to medications. It's just made a transformational difference in my productivity, my emotional self-regulation, my creativity, my joy, my ability to self-soothe and be calm. It's been really, I wish I had known sooner. And yeah, I think that that's why like mental health and mental health professionals are super important, is that I think a lot of us medicate with, other things when maybe what we need is, some
Absolutely.
care.
I mean, it must have been quite difficult to kind of go through life and navigate it without knowing. And I know that a label, for a lot of people, they don't want a label. They think it might be a negative thing. But for a lot of other people, once you get that diagnosis or that label, it really helps you understand yourself more. How do you feel about it?
I'm super comfortable with it. I'm like happy to share it and talk about it. I think that a sort of adult onset or ADD, look, I think there's a lot of drivers around what drives that diagnosis. I think there's trauma. I think there's stress. I think some of it is, predispositions genetically. I think I kind of have all three of those things. I sort of try to everything, like mindfulness, getting more sleep, getting exercise, drinking lots of water, drinking caffeine, taking sort of all of the natural supplements on the market to help with focus. What I found is that so much of my anxiety was actually driven by not getting the care I needed. So it's amazing to me. And that's how you know if you really have it, right? Like if a person who doesn't have it takes, medication, they're speedy, they're racy, they're all over the place. For someone who actually does have it, I'm like calmed, focused, relaxed, immediately can be present, calmer. It's like your whole entire nervous system just calms down. Now, are there modalities in life that I can work on that will, I hope in time, give me that faculty to be able to manage it within my own diet and food and sleep? Probably. Because I do know that these types of sort of ADD, ADHD, for some people, not all, are a result of trauma and stress and anxiety and sort of experiences in life that happened perhaps very young. But for me, I'm like, oh, this is great. Like I know how to take care of myself, and knowing how to take care of yourself, there's something really satisfying and powerful about that you just know, okay, I know how to take care of myself, and that feels really good. It's like my son wants to tie his own shoes. For me, I feel really excited to know how to take care of my health.
I completely agree with you as well, and that's something that I had to learn to do as well. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia at a younger age, about 16 years old, and none of the doctors could help me with anything, but I managed to fix myself, heal myself by learning what my body needs, learning what my brain needs, and eventually I was like, oh, it's very heavily linked to anxiety. And now I feel like I probably also have ADHD, and so I'm going to work towards a diagnosis on that. And that would also make a lot of sense because these things are so heavily interlinked. And the stress of anxiety that can cause all of these physical symptoms, as well as the mental issues and struggles that a lot of people with ADHD struggle with, it just interlinks so much. And one thing I found, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but when I improved my anxiety, which I didn't know I had for a really long time, that high functioning part of me went down, and I actually started to struggle more with ADHD symptoms. Because it's almost like that anxiety was keeping everything in check. So if I had those deadlines, I was so anxious about it, I would make myself do things. And then the executive dysfunction got slightly worse when my anxiety got slightly better. So it's all like a perpetual cycle. So have you noticed any interlinking between your mental health, your physical health, and ADHD?
So really good question. My health has skyrocketed with improvement, which is super wild. My cholesterol, my blood pressure, all of my inflammation levels. And really it's because there's something amazing about being able to take care of yourself. It just creates this confidence where you start to just stack on healthier and healthier habits. I do notice that my inclination to choices around what contributes to my mental health and emotional health is much more driven towards healthy choices. And I noticed that as it relates to like the people I'm attracted to or the events I want to go to or the things that I'm interested in. I noticed that I'm like way less interested in anything that's sort of toxic or creates a negative experience within my mental or physical body. I do realize, and I think the misnomer about mental health is that when I was younger, and really my therapist helped me understand this, I always thought, okay, mental health equals depression. And depression looks, a certain way. It's, people who can't get out of bed and people who can't change their clothes or take a shower or go to work. Or it just sort of occurred to me that like a mental health issue was depression and what depression was. And that's maybe because of all of those ads they ran about like, you're just like a lethargic sloth that like, lays around and you're like depressed. And that was really inaccurate, right? Like there's like a lot of high functioning people that have depression, but their depression is expressed in anxiety. And so then you have like an entire society of people who are depressed, who are not getting the care they need, who are high functioning, and they're going through life with a completely booked out calendar and a to-do list and mailboxes cleaned and high performing, but they're not happy. They're not feeling good. And so I realized, and my therapist was like, Moj, like you have this idea that like depression looks like someone who just, is, I don't know, like just hates living and, just does nothing all day. A lot of people are extremely high functioning and their depression manifests as anxiety. And I was like, oh, wow, like that was a big breakthrough for me, that like my output level being so robust wasn't because I'm like the hardest worker. It was actually like how my depression or just my mental state had like functioned right into like anxiety, which was then functioning into overperformance. And so what I notice now is I do way less. I move way slower. I'm way more thoughtful. I take a lot of time to respond and think about things. I do not feel like, as soon as I feel pressured by someone or something, I like immediately tell them like, hey, I feel pressured. This kind of pressure like isn't going to work on me. I'm going to need, a few days to sort of think it through. So there's something about it for me, and I don't know for everyone, but there's just been a real freedom and understanding how that looks for me. And so now I just have a lot of space between me and the anxiety. I like look at the anxiety now, like I see it and I'll like name it and I like acknowledge it. And then I like agree to like give it the space it needs. And then I like kind of I'm on the other side of it and I'm like, this flight I have to take tomorrow is giving me a ton of anxiety. And just being able to name it, being able to say it, I think just immediately brings down the like sensory of stress.
Yeah. So is that like kind of similar with all emotions? If you give them the space they need so you can process them, they don't get stuck. And so it's the same with like overthinking as well. If you give space to a thought instead of giving it loads of attention and you just kind of look at it, observe it, and then let it go, that's the best way to process any kind of thought or feeling, basically. You mentioned as well that you have developed more healthy habits and they've kind of stacked up. So could you tell us a bit more about like what those habits are and how often you do them and the best things that have worked for you in terms of your ADHD and anxiety?
I mean, it's funny because I feel like they're kind of the basic principles of like sleep, get sleep, I wear an Oura ring to manage that sleep, to keep myself accountable to that sleep. I look at things like REM, like I'll notice immediately like, oh, I didn't get great REM, I'm going to have a lot more anxiety today. If I get at least, this much REM, I'm going to have more, almost like an extra battery pack of like being able to just handle stress loads. So sleep is a big one. Right? The quality of sleep matters. So like when I go to bed, if I eat before I go to bed, like it's so funny. Like you start to, once you start paying attention to all the factors, it's like, my best life, I go to bed early, I don't eat before bed. I, optimize for like a dark, deep, cold sleep. Now listen, I've got 2 kids under 6, right? So like life is the best you can. If I can get like, I don't know, 3 or 4 nights like that a week, I'm like super happy. And the nights I can't, I'm like, cool, this is life. And you're just kind of rolling with it. So what I eat also matters, like staying away from like foods that are just, I don't know, like super duper spicy. I notice like impact my sort of cortisol levels and like my sort of energetically help make it difficult to sort of sleep well at night. Even though I love spicy food, like love. I don't really drink. I'm not an alcohol person. I don't really do drugs, CBD gummies here and there to chill and relax. Cool. I try to get a lot of exercise. Again, I have young kids, and it's hard. So walks are happening, and that's important. If I can go out for a swim, that's like the best case scenario for me. That's like my happy place, swimming. That's like my perfect mental tranquility moment is swimming. And then I just try to honestly just pay attention to myself. Like, this person gives me anxiety. This person's making me feel stressed. Like, what is that about? And then I think it's much easier to sort of have space with your anxiety if you understand that life is not personal. What people are doing is not personal. How, all of these instances in life that are going on, like your car's late, or I don't know, they brought you the wrong food. Like, all of this stuff is not personal. It's just like everyone else in life is dealing with their own stresses and dramas and concerns. And so we're kind of a whole bunch of people put together, going through life. And I just try to imagine as much as I can that whatever this is that people are perceived doing to me, it's literally not about me. And I'm just, in the middle of this jungle dealing with a lot of, I do notice that people who have ADD or ADHD are also, for me, I'm an empath. You're just very sensitive. I think that's the biggest misnomer of people who have ADD or high functioning is that the depth of your feelings are, because people just perceive you as someone that's busy and getting shit done. But I find that we're highly sensitive, maybe more sensitive than most. My other friends who are sort of similar to me in makeup, I noticed that it's much more easier to hurt my, it's not hard to hurt my feelings because I'm actually quite sensitive. And so I'm also just an empath. So I'm very sensitive to the energy in the room or the energy of the people I'm close to. So if they're feeling anxious, I can pick that up. And sometimes I just have to the number one thing I do. Ooh, I forgot. The infrared sauna, non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. Infrared sauna. That thing is a ginormous shot of chill. It's just insane. If I just get in there 4 times a week, I'm in really good spirits.
Same. I started taking saunas after the gym, and it is a game changer. And there's multiple levels of why that's a game changer as well. I mean, heat therapy is so good for your muscles, for inflammation. It helps you sweat out any toxins that you have. The toxins could be contributing to poor mental health as well. Just being warm is also very nice. So there's many good benefits to it. And then if you pair it with cold therapy as well, the cold therapy will help reduce cortisol levels. Again, it will reduce inflammation as well. There's so many good things about hot and cold therapy. It is a massive game changer.
That sunlight and infrared sauna, man, that thing is one of the best things I've ever invested in for my well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said about eating well as well. And so I don't know if you know or if our listeners know, but there's a huge link between gut health and mental health. The mind-gut connection can cause a lot of mental health issues. And for instance, if you do eat spicy food, even though it tastes really good, it does cause inflammation. So if you have an inflamed gut, you're actually more likely to have an anxious mind the next day. And people don't realize that. And while it's good to have these things sometimes because we enjoy them, if we had them all the time and always had an inflamed gut, it's more likely that we will have poor mental health. So by improving your diet to things that don't trigger your gut, you're more likely to have good mental health. So yeah, it's important that people know this, and there's a lot more research being done on it right now as well.
Or at least eat it in the daytime, right?
So that you can get it out your system.
Exactly. So if I'm in the UK and I'm craving, I know I want to go eat Pakistani or Indian food, I'll just go for a 2 p.m. lunch, right? So that I know I can walk it off, so that I know I can have a ton of tea and water before I go to bed. But I could not eat that food anymore at 9 p.m. when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. And also if you do want to eat it and then you have a sauna later in the day, you'll sweat out a lot of the toxins that you've eaten. So that helps massively as well. I mean, I had a health coach earlier this year that helped me learn a lot about gut health and things that triggered it. And after eating clean for 2 weeks, I then had an Indian curry I've never bloated so much in my entire life, and it was painful because I went from eating so clean to eating spicy food, and it just showed me that it really does make a difference. It really does affect you. But when you do it all the time, you kind of don't notice as much. So it's just important to be mindful about it, really. You can't be perfect all the time. Absolutely. And food is yummy, so you don't want to avoid the ones that you like. But yeah, so there's different things that you can do. Running as well, sweating it out by running or doing cardio, that's also good if you don't have the sauna option. So the other thing I wanted to loop back on as well was you saying about being an empath. I am also an empath. So just to explain to people in case they don't know what empath is, like you explained a bit already, but it is like when you enter a room, you will pick up on other people's energies and their moods without them even telling you, without them even looking at you, and you'll instantly know how they're feeling. But whilst this could be a superpower, this is actually a learned behavior that we learn at such a really young age through hypervigilance. So a lot of ADD and ADHD people will be empaths because they overthink so much, and because they most likely grew up in an environment where they had to be on edge. They had to have that hypervigilance so that they could control their surroundings and make sure to avoid confrontation as much as possible. So for example, if you had primary caregivers that were a bit volatile, you would walk into a room, notice that they were slightly off, and just leave the room or do something to control the scenario so that it wouldn't explode. And so that's, as a child, you don't understand necessarily what's happening, but you develop that part of your brain and that intuition, and you do become empathic. So I would say it's a superpower. But have you ever noticed that if you walk into a room, you highlight instantly who is in a bad mood or a negative mood and not necessarily who is in a good mood? Have you noticed that?
So if I'm not present and I walk into a room, I do notice that. If I'm prepared to walk in, so now I just prepare myself to walk into a room, right? And what I do is I sort of walk into the room and scan for the energy, scan for the vibes, and then I just push myself towards whoever is the most positive or loving in that room, that's the most open. And I give space to whoever's having a bad day, or they're in a negative space, or they just don't want to connect with me, and sort of just acknowledge and like give that space to those people because whatever they're dealing with, and go and double down into where there is a aligned frequency and a aligned connection, or just aligned openness, right? Just to have like an exchange. Hypervigilance is such a superpower, but it comes at such a great cost. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And the cost of it is, or I think what there is to understand is, you only have like so much sort of RAM in your brain, right? And if you are just like auditing and detailing out like AI, like every single thing that goes on in a room, in a space, the tone in a conversation, you're going to be exhausted mentally and emotionally, exactly. And you're going to be physically exhausted. For me, like the greatest breakthroughs have been over the past 4 years of me forgetting stuff, me not remembering, me not knowing what that was that we ordered the last time we ate together. And I consider those to be amazing achievements because it means that I've like acknowledged that there's hypervigilance, but that I'm also letting it know that I'm safe, that I'm loved, and that I'm going to be just fine, and that I don't need to be hypervigilant in every moment. Now, if I'm in the middle of a negotiation or a deal, I have the advantage here. Like, and it kind of makes me a really good closer, a really good business person. I think I'm one of the best marketers and sort of corp dev, biz dev partnerships people I know. And it's because I'm just hypervigilant on the other person and when they need. I know as soon as you pick up the phone, or even how we set the meeting, whether or not this thing is going to move forward or not, and how soon until we close and what that looks like. Now, I think there's like acknowledging that, but also taking a step back to let like sort of life be eventful. And you know, I really appreciate now, like I'm always so proud of myself where I'm like, oh yeah, how did we get to that house again last time? Or like when I start to forget things that are irrelevant, right? You know, I have a Google Maps, so I don't need to remember every single detail of every single house that was along the way until I get to a location. And so one of the things I'm proud of as I reparent myself at this point in my life and my career is allowing myself the ability to forget. And I think that, so I think that's kind of like how I think about the hypervigilance piece of it. And the empath piece of it is such a heavy thing to carry around with you. And I think the other thing that's really important to notice is not everyone wants to be seen. Not everyone wants to be known. And so understanding, because I think people who have ADD and ADHD also have a relationship to truth and like what actual truth means. But what I need like from life is different than what other people need. I crave truth, but other people may have a different set of things, principles that sort of are for them a giving experience. And so just because you see someone's having a bad day or you see they're feeling complicated or you see that they're unhappy doesn't mean like you turn around and you're like, hey, like you seem really bummed out today. Are you okay? Like sometimes people just need to be like in their feelings. So if you're one of those people that sees everyone in real time all the time, know that sometimes people's aversion to you isn't because they don't like you. It's because it's difficult for them that you see them so intensely that they sometimes feel naked. And so I sometimes say to my friends, I'm like, oh, I know that it's hard because I just see what's going on with you. And you can talk to me about it when you're ready.
That's so good. Yeah, because I mean, I've experienced it as well. Like I really, really see people and they know I see them and it's hard. It is hard. And people have actively said to me, because I'm so easy to talk to, they say, I just feel so vulnerable around you and I just open up and I don't like it. And they say, I don't want you here because I don't like opening up. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just asking you how you are, but I'm asking, how are you, you know? So sometimes people just don't want that. And I have been pushed away from people sometimes. They're like, you know too much. I don't want people to know me that well. And I'm like, but why? Because I'm the same. Like the truth is what I want to know. It's what I want to give. And I feel like if everyone has all of the information, communication is so much better. But not everyone thinks the same way. You're totally right. It's not something I've seen talked about that much either. The wanting to know the truth all the time.
Well, I think it can feel very confrontational.
Yeah, it can.
And so I think for people who are like avoidant of confrontation, they need a lot of space from people who see them, because they may have a lot of things that they're holding inside that they don't want to share. And so if they're around an empath and a person who has ADD or ADHD and they're hypervigilant, like that's really intense for someone that's, hyper, conflict avoidant. So this is what I mean. It's like, as an adult, I scan around where people are, not just how they feel. Where are they? Where are they in their journey? Oh, this person's avoids confrontation and doesn't want to be seen. Cool. I didn't notice that you were bummed out. I'm sorry you were feeling that way.
Yeah. Have you ever tried like, I see you. If you want me, I'm over there. Have you ever tried that?
I do that for some, and for a lot of people I say, I didn't notice, I didn't see. Because they'll say to you, oh, I don't know if you know, but I was in a really bad mood that day. And I'll say, oh, I didn't notice.
But you did.
Because it's important for them.
Yeah.
I did notice. Of course I did. But it's important for them to feel that they are maintaining composure. In control. So what do I get out of telling them like, I see you? Like that there's nothing, that just gives me like it's an advantage that doesn't benefit that person if you care about them. So often I'll just say like, I didn't notice. I didn't hear that. I didn't know. Because what they need to feel safe is being hidden. Mm-hmm. And I respect that now. I like all the time, like I'll just be like, oh, I didn't notice you were having a shitty day that day. That sucks. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
I totally noticed. I just knew that you weren't ready to talk about it. And for me to ask you if you want to talk about it would feel super confrontational, and you would feel borderline attacked that someone was coming into your little crab shell to, poke and see if you're okay. Sometimes other people need to self-soothe in a different way.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And you've kind of almost evolved yourself using your empath superpowers to the point where it's not just picking up on their emotions, it's picking up on their vulnerability and comfortability with that. So you've almost gone like another level of it to make it so that other people are still comfortable.
I try I really try. I understand that it's uncomfortable to be around someone that has this level of like hypervigilance and is an empath and, you know, is left brain, right brain, ADD. Like that can be intense, you know? So yeah, like for me, I'm kind of in my era of, you know, I don't know what the like PC way of saying it in today's world of like, you know, like I'm in my like thought era of just being like, oh, like I'm just bumping around, being an airhead, like, you know, just being like not paying attention. And it's authentic. It is. I'm giving myself the day off. I'm literally like, sometimes I'll be like, where did I park my car? I love those days. I love the days where I can't remember where I parked my car. Cause I'm like, this is amazing. You are totally checked out of hypervigilance. You're being in your moment. You're just relaxing. That's wonderful.
I really love that because especially your metaphor about having RAM, because I always say that. I always say my brain only has so much RAM and it only has so much memory storage, and I have to pick and choose. I can't remember everything, but I used to remember everything. And I still, my long-term memory, like the stuff that I remember from being a kid is probably because I was so hypervigilant all the time. And now I'm like, I have no idea what I had for breakfast because it doesn't matter, you know? So I love that you've framed it that way.
Well, the other thing I will say is I'm married, and one of the things that my wife always teases me about is she says, for everyone else, you remember everything, but for me, you remember nothing. And we were talking it through with my therapist, and my therapist said, it's because Moj feels really safe with you.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And I feel so safe with my wife, and this drives her nuts, and it's not fair to her, but I'll like forget to do this chore or forget to do this email or forget to tell someone, you know, something that she told me to say. And I always have to tell her, like, you see it as a sign of me not caring. And what you should know is for me, it's a sign of extreme safety with you that I can actually forget. And so, yeah, I'm like in this really interesting relationship with myself as it relates to my mental health, because I've really, you know, started to like learn what this looks like. Now I'm trying for my wife. It's really important to feel like someone's listening to her and remembers what she says. But now that I know that my forgetfulness as it relates to her is an expression of feeling safe, I'm like working towards how do I remember to do the things that I said I would do, or, you know, that would be helping her make her life easier. But it's been just so trippy because I forget with her so many things all the time.
Yeah, it's almost like the highest compliment ever, but really frustrating for her.
I think it's super frustrating for her. It's frustrating for my best friend. But there's like a handful of people in life that I trust and love so much that I feel safe with, that like when I'm with them, I literally am like a ditz.
Yeah. Interestingly, I had a similar conversation with someone the other day. They said that their partner frustratingly wouldn't do something that he would normally do with other people, and I was like, yeah, but that's because he doesn't have anxiety around you. And she goes, oh, well, that's kind of nice. I was like, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So it does make
Exactly.
a huge difference when you feel safe and you don't have to remember things, and yeah, not treading on eggshells around someone, and you're relaxed, you're not in fight or flight mode, you're not hypervigilant. And like, if you do that chore, it's okay. If you don't do that chore, it's also okay, because it's not the end of the world and no one's going to blow up at you. So yeah, it's a good compliment.
I mean, she still might blow up at me, but it's kind of like, it's different in the sense that like we can talk about it and joke about it, you know?
Yeah. And you said about reparenting yourself as well. I'm not sure if people will know what that is. I know what that is, but maybe you could explain that a bit more for people who are listening.
I left home when I was 16, so I really, for the most part, reparented myself from, I think, sort of 14, 15 on. I have a good relationship with my mom and dad as the people who brought me into this planet, as the grandparents to my children, as the folks that I see on the holidays. But when I think about the ways in which I need to be nurtured and cared for, I sort of went through a very intimate process with a therapist that I really trust over the past almost 5 years now of transferring that expectation that one would have, you know, in parents or one parent, transferring that relationship to my therapist, redeveloping sort of what good hygiene means in terms of how does one get taken care of by someone that's parenting, and then slowly over time they transfer that responsibility back to yourself. And so we sort of agreed it would be like a 7-year cycle. And so I guess I'm like 5 years into it, where I'm now, for the most part, sometimes I'll go like weeks without talking to, my therapist, and I'll be like, oh my God, like, I just like checking in, like I'm doing really well, and all of these tough things happened, and I was able to like sort of parent myself through those moments. And so it's a super intimate thing to do with another person. But I think for those of us who sort of had a missing of an experience of like what it felt like to be emotionally cared for, it was really, really, really important for me to do that, especially as someone who's now a parent to children and a spouse. I needed to learn what it felt like to be parented, and now I understand what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say there's quite a lot of people who their parents were there for them, but not emotionally. And so it can bring about things like self-worth issues, self-esteem issues, people-pleasing, things like that. Because if you weren't getting their emotional needs met, you tried to find other ways to get that love. So another thing that ADHD and ADD people experience is people-pleasing. It's almost like you have to earn that love. But as you say, if you do things like inner child healing, you can remind yourself and teach yourself that actually you don't need to do that. So the way to kind of recover from people-pleasing and low self-worth is to reparent your inner child, make yourself feel safe, remind yourself that you are now your primary caregiver and you will always love yourself. And once you can do that, these things kind of start to dissolve. Your self-worth is higher. You realize that you are lovable and that it doesn't need to be earned. You're lovable just because you exist. People will love you because you exist. And as long as you're going around being a kind person, trying to be your best self, you don't have to earn that love. So I mean, I've done that journey as well. It's a very powerful thing to come to that realization and to rewrite your life script. And it also helps massively with the emotional regulation as well, because if you learn to self-soothe your inner child, then when you do feel sad, when you do feel lonely or angry or whatever, you can give yourself the emotional support that you need because you know exactly how you need it. And you may not have received that when you're a child, but you can now. And so you kind of imagine yourself as a little 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 3-year-old, and then you can give yourself exactly what you need in that moment. Be like, I can see that you're angry. I can see that you're sad. And then you just give the space to those emotions and like be there for yourself. So is that kind of what you do now as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I have like this insane, awesome relationship with myself. It's so strange when you're able to like objectively pull away from like the experience of emotion and kind of observe yourself in those moments. I really appreciate the work and effort I've made to sort of reestablish this line with myself. It's been one of the most fruitful experiences of my life. And I truly do feel like everyone in my life, from my children to my wife, to my friends, to the founders I invest in, to my business partners, to a stranger I might meet, sort of benefits from this relationship, benefits from the space I have. I noticed that my empathy is like, it's like tremendously more than it used to be. And it's different than hypervigilance, and it's different than, being an empath. It's more of a function of just being able to have a lot of empathy, which it feels at first kind of like, I can't explain it. It's like, I just noticed that like, I have a lot of new feelings and thoughts that are kind of like first time feelings and thoughts for myself. And it's almost like I'm experiencing myself like through the lens of like, I don't know, Christmas morning or something, where I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. I have all of these new levers emotionally. My relationship with myself is so intact. Yeah, it's totally like what's for me is for me and what's not is not. And I don't feel that I need to like earn my place like in someone's life or something like that,
Yeah, it's an incredibly freeing thing. And I definitely agree. It does give you a much deeper empathy for people because you kind of realize that everyone is just a child that grew up. Like, I think we give a lot of harshness towards adults, because we're like, adults should know what they're doing. You're an adult, act like an adult. But actually, not everyone learns the same things. Not everyone learns at the same pace. We're just children that just got older. We don't know what we're doing.
I mean, if you look at the headlines of today, it is fair to say that the entire world is run by man babies and man women and man people who are so deeply unparented, who are so deeply unloved, who feel unlovable, who feel unseen, who feel like at the height of anxiety, like deeply dysfunctional, toxic sort of unwellness. And this is what it looks like when a world doesn't focus on their well-being, because anyone who's focused on their well-being would not be making the kinds of decisions that our leaders are making today. And so when I look at, who I want to work with, who do I want to invest in, who do I want to co-invest in, who are the types of founders I'm looking for, partners I want to work with, I look for people that are, do they have a relationship with themselves that I value and respect, that I think brings something to the table? Are they able to be in a world that's super complicated and self-regulate and still be open? And so, I think it's really important, especially in today's day and age, with all this power that we have, whether it's AI or capitalism or entrepreneurship or parenting. It's such a controversial, time in the world. Like, I think this is the most important thing we can do, which is focus deeply on our own emotional well-being. And if we find that there's something missing for us, to double down and double click and develop that skill and develop that relationship. Because for me, like, I think I'm in the best shape I've ever been. And I find that there's very little in life right now that really shakes my foundational core to myself.
Yeah, and that's really solid to be like that, because then no matter what happens in your environment, you're always going to be okay. You've always got yourself. So, and that's the other thing, like, you go through life and the only constant you ever have is that you will always be with yourself. You can't not be with yourself. So you will always have yourself. So that self-love is like super duper important. And then obviously you've mentioned that therapy has had a huge hand in helping you with this. Would you say that was maybe the biggest thing that's helped your ADHD and ADD, or would you say that it's a combination of different tools?
I like a lot of different modalities. Therapy is like the consistent modality in my life, but I also appreciate, different modalities of mental exploration, whether it's through medicinals. I also appreciate, breathing techniques and meditation. I also appreciate things like ACA or Al-Anon, which again helps people sort of stand in, life is not happening at me, but it's happening for me. And that there's something powerful in all of these life experiences as lessons. And so I think, look, I'm a first generation Iranian. Most of the people who are first generation grew up with a lot of immigrant trauma, especially for those of us who were exiled and through, a lot of very intense political, disruption that looks horrifying on a headline. And so I think this anxiety that our families grew up with metastasizes in all kinds of different ways that are fundamentally unhealthy for, young people, like i.e. myself as a child, right? And so I sort of double click, but I used to be someone that was like coaching and like, retreats, and like, I like that stuff. I think those are fine. What I feel like brings a rigor to my mental health is the repeated, behavior of either attending a meeting and going to therapy. And I think those are kind of like two non-negotiables for me. It's kind of like a workout regimen, but it's emotional and it's mental. I feel like everything else is additive, compounded on top of it. And sometimes you just need to also like lay on the beach in the hot sun and get like a lot of vitamin D and like chill out. And I think like there's something to be said for rest. There's something to be said for play. So like things that I try to do now is like, what are fun hobbies I can do? What are the things I can do that are like not work? Like my therapist will always say like, I'd like you to watch more fiction film and more, read more fiction content, because I'm like the junkie in the autobiography, nonfiction documentary section, because it's like hypervigilance, just like guzzling data. And it's like, what? Like, you don't need to know everything that happened in history. You can just like get stuck in some weird sci-fi situation or whatever and just like zone out. And so, yeah, I think that it's crucial therapy for me as someone who's tried a lot of other things. There's something about having an accountability buddy that, keeps you honest.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think a lot of people struggle with the sitting still and doing something for fun. And personally, I ended up turning all of my hobbies into work. So I'm like, I just work all the time now. So that's something that I've always struggled with as well. And I think a lot of people with ADHD, again, it's like they are creative people and they love to do creative things, and then they realize, oh well, I could actually make this productive and make money from it, and then they're just working more. So sometimes you need to keep things for yourself just for fun, and not consuming information all the time. Like, it's okay to read a fiction book. You don't have to read a non-fiction book. It can just be for fun.
Totally. Yes, I agree.
Cool. So I think, just to end off things, I'd just like to ask you, if you could speak to yourself when you were younger, what advice would you give yourself with regards to the ADHD and ADD and how you got to where you are?
What would I tell myself? I would have probably stuck with therapy like a little deeper, a little sooner. And I might have suggested that I be a lot more curious about what are the impacts of the mind and spirit growing up in like high stress environments, right? And I think that for me, a lot of things have been normalized over the past few years, just learning about how stress and trauma metastasizes inside the body. You know, there's like a great book, like The Body Keeps Score, right? And I've read like a lot of books like this now, but I think creating less of a stigma about what makes me unique and more of a curiosity about it is something that I would have done a lot sooner, because I think shame is really, it really stagnates personal growth, and you know, it can be quite damaging over time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's a lot of the shame often comes from what you think other people will think, and it's important to kind of release that and be like, it doesn't really matter what other people think, because I'm living my life.
Yes,
so yeah, I
agree.
totally agree with you. And if you learn what your superpowers are, you learn what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, you get to navigate that. It's not up to anybody else. So you get to choose what you do with your life, and you chose to live this incredible life, and you're doing so many good things in the world, and you're creating great communities, and you're investing in people that you believe in and businesses that you believe in. And I think that's a really wonderful way for you to bring your strengths to the table and to help the world in a very positive way. So I think that's great.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thank you so
me.
much for speaking today. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope to see you again soon.